When people think about commodities in the Persian Gulf, the first thing that they tend to think about is oil and gas. But there's a byproduct of all that oil and gas processing that is often overlooked, and it's sulfur. China imported more than 5 million tons of sulfur from the Persian Gulf last year, which it mostly used to make sulfuric acid, a product that some people call the king of chemicals for how well used it is. Sulfuric acid is not only essential for making phosphate fertilizers, it's also essential for turning ore from the ground into clean, usable metals. And it's not only China. Indonesia also takes in several million tons of sulfur every year as they look to cash in on their nickel reserves and become a battery metal production powerhouse. So, any interruption in the flow of sulfur from the Persian Gulf would have an immediate effect on Asian fertilizer prices, which in turn would push food prices higher in the world's single most important market. And electric vehicle makers would also be hit with higher costs for their batteries, endangering the switch to electric vehicles. So even for something as obscure as sulfur, the Strait of Hormuz is critically important.
The Strait of Hormuz sees crude oil flows of over 14 million barrels a day of crude and over 4 million barrels a day of refined products flowing through it every single day. The majority of these crude flows run to Asia. Now, some of the key Middle East oil producing nations export their oil through the Strait of Hormuz. When we look at Saudi Arabia, around 4 million barrels a day of crude oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Iraq sees over 3 million barrels a day of crude oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, followed by the UAE with about 2.5 million barrels a day. Iran sees about 1.5 million barrels a day of crude oil flowing through it, as does Kuwait, just over 1 million. You then have some of the smaller producers, like Qatar, who exports its crude also through the Strait of Hormuz. So this all adds up to over 14 million barrels a day of crude oil. We then, on the buy side, see China, a major buyer of Middle Eastern crude oil, with 5.2 million barrels a day of crude flowing through the Strait of Hormuz to China each and every day, followed by India, which imports around 2 million barrels a day of crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz. You then see Japan and South Korea with just over 1.5 million barrels a day, and then some other consumers also buying oil that flows through the Strait of Hormuz. So when we think about it, that 20 million barrels a day of crude and refined products and over 14 million barrels a day of crude oil, any impact to the Strait of Hormuz would have a major impact on the oil markets, not just from the consuming side, but also on the producing side.
Amid the ongoing tensions within the Middle East, Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping lane connecting countries like Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait to the rest of the world. The strait, positioned at a critical juncture, is about 30 nautical miles wide and is regulated by the use of a traffic separation scheme, or TSS. The TSS allows for vessels to move in either direction safely, but restricts the navigable waters to just 2 nautical miles on either side. In the previous years, tensions within the region have impacted merchant ships transiting through the strait, with attacks in the late 1980s and as recent as 2019, where ships were attacked using limpet mines, causing fires and explosions. With the Red Sea closed for vessels due to Houthis targeting ships crossing Bab el-Mandeb, a closure of the Strait of Hormuz would also severely impact polyethylene and polypropylene markets in the North and West Africa, causing supply shortages and price hikes. It could disrupt 9.5 million tons of global linear low-density polyethylene and 3.9 million tons of low-density polyethylene production, mainly from Middle Eastern sources that supply to Africa. Countries like Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, which rely heavily on imports, would face higher costs and seek alternative sources from Asia, Europe, or the Americas.
Approximately 20% of the world's LNG, primarily sourced from Qatar and the UAE, transits through the Strait of Hormuz. The recent Israel-Iran conflict has caused spikes in global gas prices, driven by concerns over the potential closure of the strait due to Iranian retaliation. Such a closure would have strained relationships between Iran, Qatar, and the UAE, which rely on the strait for their LNG exports, as well as China, Iran's largest export market, rendering the likelihood of such closure low. Despite this, JKM spot prices in Northeast Asia responded more dramatically than TTF prices in Europe, underscoring Asia's greater dependence on Qatari LNG. But while prices have since moderated to the low to mid 30 euros per megawatt hour range on the TTF month ahead, thanks to a decrease in geopolitical tensions, the risk has not entirely dissipated. Overall, our analysts expect Asian markets to maintain a premium over Europe in Q3, but demand in the region remains subdued. Meanwhile, Europe continues to receive robust LNG volumes, focusing on filling its gas storage facilities with expectations that they will exceed 85% by November 1st.